And I've been in both really, really successful collaborations and ones that have not been quite so successful. And what's really important is to decide, and probably a lot of you in this room already know this, is who's going to do what? Okay, what are your responsibilities in those roles? Some often, at least in my collaborations, we've had different expertise, but there's been some where we've had overlapping expertise, and the bulk of the work can actually end up falling on one person. You know, it's one thing to put something on paper and write a big grant and say, oh, we're going to investigate the following. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. But then, you know, what is the actual... And you're going to come up with the experimental design and some of these details when you write a grant proposal, but who actually is going to do that? I mean, generally when you write a grant, you have some of the experimental work has already been done, or you have some of your paradigms, you have your equipment set up, but sometimes you don't. So I think it's really important to know who's going to do these kinds of things. Who's going to actually develop the experimental design? Are we going to do that together? Are we going to, you know, who's going to put this equipment in place? Is that all going to be the PI in the PI's lab? You know, it gets kind of complicated when you have several investigators and they all have people on their part, okay, especially in a subcontract kind of situation. So, you know, who's going to do that? Are we going to do that at your shop or are we going to do it at mine? So those are things to really, really talk about it. And early on, I mean, getting the ideas on paper is just one of many, many things that have to be done. And I think it's important to at least discuss that. And as writing here, the same thing is to determine these expectations sometimes before you enter into the collaboration. But saying that, I mean, being flexible is really important. So if you go in and you say, okay, well, let's do this. This is going to be great. Right now, in fact, just yesterday, I was going to put this on a slide. I got an email from a new assistant professor in neurosurgery, and he wants to do RTMS. And it turns out that people in my lab already went to visit him. And so he emailed me and said, you know, I met with the people in the lab, and I'm really excited about, you know, meeting with you and doing some collaboration and all this kind of stuff. And so then the next thing was, well, thank you for getting in touch with me. I mean, I'm going to be out of town this week. I'll be back next week, and maybe, you know, what's good for your schedule? And he said, oh, Monday or Tuesday would work, but I'm flexible. Okay, so that to me says something. Okay, so he's really going to, you know, adjust his schedule so that it will fit with mine at this point. But that's at this point. So then you have to both maintain flexibility. So before I have that conversation with him, I'm going to have in mind what I want. He probably is going to have in mind what he wants, but we both are going to have to work together to figure out what's going to work. So I think that's important. The timelines, it's really important not only in developing the grant proposal, but also in carrying out all the work, to have the timelines really down pat. I mean, we're all really, really busy, and it's easy to let something slide unless you have, you know, a time frame that you have committed to meeting for all of these things. So when are we going to do this? When are we going to do that? And always having someone checking up on it. So who's going to do that? Who's going to make sure that the timelines are met? Usually that falls to the PI, but sometimes PIs don't do that. I've been on a grant where I'm not the PI, and the PI is not doing these things in a timely manner. And it's easy for me to say, oh, good, he forgot about that. I'll have another week to do something else. And Melissa already mentioned communication. You know, we have periodic meetings. We have lab meetings every week. We have center meetings once a month. We have, you know, lots of stuff going on. And then the summaries and discussions and action steps. You know, what are we going to do now? So here's where we are, but what are we going to do next? And then just one more little bit of something, authorship. This has already been mentioned a little bit, but I think, and this is a tough one, and I'm sure you've all had this kind of situation, even with your students, or if you are a student with your mentor. You know, these are the kinds of conversations that really need to take place very early. And I recommend before beginning a project. And then follow-up conversations as the data emerge. Now, first author and senior author, you know, I always thought first author was the best place to be. And I, too, have collaborators in the medical school, and their whole thing is senior author. And I'll never forget when we had a postdoc who was in one of our projects, and she said, oh, is this my first senior author thing? And I'm going, oh, God, why are you so happy that you're going to be last author? But I'm always last author now, almost always. I just think that, I think that our field does that too. So I'm clearly always last author on my students' work, but even on, grant projects, it gets kind of hairy in terms of who's going to be first author. If it's a summary paper, if it's something that actually is a really crucial, important thing that I have my heart on, I will be first author on it. But most of the time, I take the senior last position. So we can have a discussion about that. I don't know what others do. I'd be interested in knowing. And then also, who's going to be an author? So the medical model also is to have like 18 authors or 25, And so I tend to be pretty open and, it's fine with me. People need to build their careers, and so they should be on papers. But other people feel differently than I do. So that's all I had to say. So I guess we're going to ask questions now or comments from others.
Thank you. One thing about authorship that I think is very important in many universities is to have a clear identification of the role that each person played, irrespective of the position, whether first or senior. Mm-hmm. This is very important because when you go up for tenure or promotion, some universities will ask for each of your papers what role you played, maybe even including percentage contribution. It's a really good thing to work that out with your co-authors, so any claim you make is one that other people will support. So if you claim, like, I did everything, and other people may not feel that that's the case. So even if that's not true where you are now, be aware that if you move, you might go to another university where they do have that expectation that you can indicate the exact role that you played on each publication. So that's a really important thing to do, and it's becoming more and more common.
Just to quickly follow up, and you're starting to see journals actually asking you to specify. You'll see SD did nothing but read the proof, and MD did all the work, or things like that. So it's becoming very explicit.
One of the things that's kind of interesting about these multi-site projects is also making data sets available to your doctoral students or postdocs, and how you do that and how it affects authorship and things like that as well.
Yeah. So. That's huge. That's huge. In fact, we just are having the discussion in my own lab right now. All the PIs and the people at each of the sites who the PI wants to have access to the data files. But we really had a bit of a not so great experience with one student who was in the lab for a very short time. And so now we only give access to the server to certain key people. People have to be in the lab and so on, because someone could come in and essentially destroy all your data, which is not a good thing. So the more data you have, the more people you have, the more sites you have, the more complicated it becomes. It really, and so all this management stuff it is like running a business. Somebody said this. I've never heard anybody say that out loud except me before. Is it somebody said, like the first day, was it you, Ray? Somebody said it's like running a small business. It really is. You have the employees, you have the people, you have to manage the money, you have to secure all of whatever it is that you're making, and those are the data, and make sure only the right people get them. And so, thanks, Howard, for that.
What would you suggest to young investigators in terms of collaborations when they approach somebody, and this has happened to a lot of people, but I know how I handle it, but I'd like to see how you handle it. When so somebody says, well, I'll help you with recruitment of the subjects, I'll be part of your study, but I need to be first author on all the papers, or something like that. That's a little extreme, I'm saying. But I've heard the words come out of people's mouths, and it's easy for me to handle something like that. We'll see you later. We don't really need you. But what would a young investigator do to handle that?
Well, I've not been in that situation, nor have I been in a situation where I felt pressured or desperate to enter into that kind of relationship. But I wouldn't go there, because in addition to that being an inappropriate relationship for the distribution of duties, that attitude tells me a great deal about how the rest of this relationship is going to go, and that I'm going to have no or little say, I'm not valued, and it will get worse from from there, I expect. So I would say no, thank you.
So, it's not very far removed. I'm still a young investigator, so I can relate to this. So, that project just moved to the back burner for me. Either if I can afford for it to be moved to the back burner and buy me some time, and if I can't afford for it to go to the back burner, I need to find a strategy where I don't need that kind of subjects anymore, or suddenly my research plan has changed substantially enough that I'm going a different route. Especially if that person is in a position of power within my institution or within my subfield who could be reviewing grants and so on and so forth.